Abraham Lincoln was born into poverty in a quiet Kentucky cabin few Americans remember today. The young Abraham Lincoln grew up surrounded by forests, hardship, and constant uncertainty. Books were rare in Lincoln's childhood, yet he read every page he could find. Long winter nights often found Lincoln studying by firelight inside the small family cabin. Education came slowly for Lincoln, built through persistence rather than privilege. Few neighbors believed the quiet boy Abraham Lincoln would someday lead a nation. Life on the frontier hardened Lincoln, teaching patience, labor, and careful observation. Even as a young man, Abraham Lincoln carried an unusual sense of reflection. Friends noticed Lincoln often fell silent, lost in deep thought about life. The future president worked countless manual jobs before ever entering politics. Abraham Lincoln split rails, ferried boats, and labored across the American frontier. Yet beneath the laborer's life, Lincoln slowly shaped a powerful mind. Law eventually attracted Abraham Lincoln, offering a path beyond frontier survival. With little formal schooling, Lincoln studied law almost entirely on his own. Soon the tall lawyer Abraham Lincoln rode horseback across Illinois court circuits. In crowded courtrooms, Lincoln's calm logic quietly impressed judges and juries. His reputation grew slowly, built on honesty and an unusual clarity of thought. Many clients trusted Abraham Lincoln simply because he seemed incapable of deceit. Politics soon called to Lincoln, drawing him into America's growing national conflict. Slavery divided the nation, and Lincoln recognized the danger approaching. Abraham Lincoln believed the United States could not survive permanently divided. His speeches warned Americans the country faced a defining moral crossroads. Some listeners admired Lincoln's courage, while others feared his ideas deeply. The political rise of Abraham Lincoln surprised even many experienced politicians. In 1860, the unlikely candidate Lincoln suddenly won the presidency. The victory shocked Southern states who saw Lincoln as a threat. Almost immediately, the nation began fracturing under immense political pressure. States declared secession before Abraham Lincoln had even taken office. By the time Lincoln arrived in Washington, civil war was already forming. The burden placed upon Abraham Lincoln became almost unimaginable. The Civil War soon erupted into the bloodiest conflict in American history. Abraham Lincoln now carried responsibility for preserving the entire nation. Each battlefield report brought devastating lists of American casualties. Lincoln read them quietly, often late into the night. Visitors sometimes found the president sitting alone in deep exhaustion. Despite pressure, Abraham Lincoln refused to abandon the Union. The war tested every decision Lincoln made as commander-in-chief. Generals failed, strategies collapsed, and political enemies circled constantly. Yet Lincoln's resolve slowly hardened through the terrible years of war. Behind the calm speeches, Lincoln endured immense personal sorrow. During the war, Abraham Lincoln also faced devastating family tragedy. His young son Willie Lincoln died inside the White House. The loss shattered Lincoln and his wife Mary beyond words. Even while grieving, Lincoln continued leading a nation in crisis. Many nights the president wandered the halls unable to sleep. The war seemed endless, its outcome painfully uncertain. Yet Lincoln began reshaping the meaning of the conflict itself. Slavery would no longer remain untouched within the United States. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The Declaration transformed the war into a fight for human freedom. Millions of enslaved people suddenly saw hope in Lincoln's decision. But the proclamation also intensified hatred among Lincoln's enemies. Some critics openly demanded the removal of Abraham Lincoln from office. Political attacks followed the president constantly throughout the war. Still, Lincoln continued moving the nation toward a new moral direction. Gradually, the Union armies began turning the tide of battle. Victories finally brought fragile hope to the exhausted country. Abraham Lincoln sensed the war's brutal end approaching. But peace would come at a devastating cost. Hundreds of thousands of Americans had already perished. As the war neared its end, Lincoln spoke carefully about reconciliation. He urged Americans to rebuild rather than seek revenge. The famous words, "with malice toward none," captured Lincoln's vision. Many listeners were surprised by Lincoln's quiet generosity toward former enemies. The Union victory finally arrived in the spring of 1865. After 4 terrible years, the Civil War ended. Abraham Lincoln had preserved the United States against overwhelming odds. The country celebrated the president who guided them through catastrophe. Yet Lincoln himself appeared weary beyond his years. The immense pressure had aged Abraham Lincoln dramatically. Friends noticed deeper lines across the president's face. Even victory brought Lincoln little personal joy. Reconstruction now demanded new leadership and careful decisions. Lincoln hoped to rebuild the nation gently. But unseen danger was already moving quietly toward him. Some extremists still blamed Abraham Lincoln for the South's defeat. Among them was a determined actor named John Wilkes Booth. Booth believed killing Lincoln could somehow revive the Confederacy. The conspiracy slowly formed as the war ended. Few people suspected the threat approaching the president. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln attended a play in Washington. The president hoped for a brief moment of relaxation. That evening, Lincoln arrived at Ford's Theater with his wife. The audience welcomed the president warmly. But hidden inside the theater, John Wilkes Booth waited. During the performance, Booth quietly entered Lincoln's private balcony. A single gunshot suddenly shattered the evening's calm atmosphere. Abraham Lincoln collapsed as the audience realized something terrible occurred. Chaos filled the theater while Booth escaped into the night. Doctors rushed desperately to save the wounded president. Lincoln was carried across the street to a small boarding house. Through the long night, officials waited silently beside him. The president never regained consciousness. Early the next morning, Abraham Lincoln died quietly. News of Lincoln's death spread across the grieving nation. Americans everywhere struggled to comprehend the shocking loss. The man who preserved the Union was suddenly gone. Funeral trains carried Lincoln's body across the country he saved. Millions stood silently as the train passed their towns. Abraham Lincoln became both legend and memory at once. Statues would later rise honoring Lincoln across the United States. His words would be studied for generations of American leaders. Yet behind the legend stood a deeply human story. Abraham Lincoln carried loneliness few presidents ever experienced. His quiet strength shaped the destiny of a fragile nation. Many Americans remember Lincoln mainly as a monument. But history also remembers the thoughtful man behind the marble figure. Lincoln's journey began in poverty and ended in national mourning. Few leaders changed their country so completely. Fewer still paid such a personal price. Time gradually softened the memory of Lincoln's difficult presidency. Yet the consequences of his leadership remain everywhere in America. The union he preserved still stands today. The freedom he defended reshaped the nation's future. Abraham Lincoln's life reminds us how fragile leadership can be. Greatness sometimes grows from the quietest beginnings. And history often forgets the loneliness behind great decisions. Lincoln carried that loneliness until his final night. The nation survived because Abraham Lincoln refused to surrender hope. But the man himself vanished into history the moment the gun fired.